The stone floor was cold beneath her knees, a familiar and unforgiving chill that seeped through the thin fabric of her worn dress. Elara dipped the coarse bristle brush into the wooden bucket, the acrid scent of lye soap filling her nostrils, and continued her work. Each scrub against the vast flagstones of Silvermane Hall was a methodical erasure of her existence. She was a ghost here, a silent, unseen thing meant to polish the world she was no longer part of. Her world had shrunk to the span of these stones, the ache in her muscles, and the constant, vigilant effort to remain invisible, to years. It felt like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. 2 years since the fallen oak pack had fallen. Her memory often retreated to that night, a violent tapestry of fire and screams, of the proud scent of pine and earth, being overwhelmed by the metallic tang of blood and conquest. They had been peaceful, her people. They valued quiet counsel over shouted orders, and the gentle art of healing over the brutal science of war. Their strength was no match for the legendary ferocity of the Silvermane warriors, led by their formidable Alpha Kaelen. The battle was not a battle at all. It was a harvest, and they were the wheat. The price of their continued breath was submission. For the warriors, it was hard labor in the quarries. For the rest, it was integration into the lowest tier of Silvermane society. Servants, slaves, the brand had come after, a final, cruel punctuation to their defeat. She remembered the heat of the iron, the sizzle of her own skin, the way the smoke carried the sweet, horrific scent of burning flesh. The crude S was now a permanent fixture on her inner wrist, a mark of ownership she carried with her always, a warning to any who might see her and forget what she was. Her only solace was the fragile, whispering hope that some of her family had survived, that her younger brother, with his quick smile, had escaped into the deep woods, that her parents were together somewhere, enduring as she was. It was a thin thread to cling to, but she held it tightly in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her. The atmosphere in the stronghold had been different all day, a current of nervous energy buzzing just beneath the surface of daily routine. The Alpha was returning. Alpha Kaelen had been away for months, dealing with a territorial dispute on the northern border. His absence had brought a certain laxity, a loosening of the strict hierarchies. Now, with his imminent return, the air was thick with tension. Warriors stood straighter, their eyes sharp. The senior staff barked orders with renewed vigor, ensuring every banner was straight, every surface gleamed, every detail was perfect for the master's homecoming. Elara kept her head down, focusing on the stubborn patch of grime she was attacking. Her assignment was the Grand Hall, the very heart of Silvermane power. It was a cavernous space, all imposing stone and dark timber, with a high ceiling lost in shadow. At one end, a massive fireplace, large enough to stand in, held a roaring fire, its flames casting dancing shadows that did little to dispel the room's inherent coldness. At the other end stood the Alpha's throne, a stark, commanding chair carved from a single, ancient oak. She avoided looking at it. The great doors at the far end of the hall suddenly swung open with a sound that echoed like a thunderclap. The chatter died instantly, swallowed by the imposing silence that followed. Elara froze, her body instinctively curling in on itself, making her as small and insignificant as possible against the cold stone. She did not look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the wet patch on the floor, her breath held in her chest. She felt him before she saw him. A pressure change in the air, a primal frequency that vibrated in her very bones. Then came his scent, cutting through the smells of smoke and soap and sweat. It was the clean, sharp scent of winter pine, of cold night air, and something else, something wild and undeniably powerful. It was the scent of absolute authority. She heard the confident, steady rhythm of his boot heels on the stone, a sound that commanded the attention of every soul in the room. She could feel the collective deference of his pack, their postures straightening, their heads bowing in respect and fear. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The footsteps did not pause to acknowledge his beta or his warriors. They did not deviate toward his throne. They came to a stop directly before her. The world narrowed to the polished leather of his boots and the hem of his dark travel cloak. She could feel the heat of his gaze upon her, a physical weight that pressed her down. She remained perfectly still, praying to any god that might be listening for the stones to open and swallow her whole. A silence, profound and terrifying, stretched between them. Then, he moved. He did not speak. Instead, he crouched down, his large frame folding with a predator's grace, bringing himself to her level. Her eyes against her will traveled upward, taking in the strong hands, the powerful forearms corded with muscle, the broad shoulders that seemed to block out the rest of the world. Finally, her gaze was drawn to his face. He was every bit the conqueror of legend. His features were sharp and severe, carved from granite and ice. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, and his eyes were a piercing, glacial blue that saw everything. They were not looking at her face. They were fixed with an unsettling intensity on her wrist, where the slave brand was exposed for all the world to see. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a growl that was not quite a word, a vibration of pure, undiluted fury. It was a sound that promised storm and ruin. He reached out. Elara flinched, bracing for the blow, for the harsh grip, for the punishment she assumed was coming for some unknown transgression. But his fingers, when they closed around her wrist, were not brutal. They were firm, yet their touch was startlingly deliberate. His skin was warm against hers, his thumb brushing over the raised, scarred flesh of the brand. The contact was like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up her arm, searing through her veins and settling deep in her core. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her eyes flying wide open to meet his. And in the depths of those arctic blue eyes, she saw her own shock reflected back at her. He had felt it too. This impossible, undeniable connection. His gaze held hers, searching, probing, seeing past the servant's dress, past the fear, past the 2 years of silence, straight into the soul of the woman she used to be. The low growl that had emanated from Alpha Kaelen's chest seemed to suck all remaining sound from the great hall. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a tension that was both terrifying and electric. Elara could not move. She could not breathe. Her entire world had narrowed to the point where his skin met hers, a searing brand of a different kind that threatened to overwrite the old one entirely. His thumb, still resting on the raised scar tissue, felt like the most intimate touch she had ever experienced. His glacial eyes, now wide with a storm of conflicting emotions, held hers captive. They were no longer just the eyes of a conqueror. They were filled with a shocking, profound confusion, a dawning recognition that seemed to shake the very foundation of his certainty. He looked from her face to the brand and back again, as if piecing together a puzzle that offended his every sensibility. The spell was broken by the hesitant shuffle of a boot from one of his warriors. Kaelen's head snapped up, his gaze sweeping over his assembled pack with a look that was pure, undiluted fury. The vulnerability she had glimpsed was gone, replaced by a chilling authority. Who is responsible for this? His voice was not a shout. It was a low, controlled vibration that carried further and struck deeper than any roar could have. It was the voice of judgment, and it demanded an answer. The head warrior, a stern man named Lucas, stepped forward, his own head bowed in a combination of respect and fear. The branding of integrated wolves falls under Beta Gorvin's command, Alpha. A fresh wave of cold dread washed over Elara. Gorvin, the man, had taken a sick pleasure in his duty the day her pack was processed. She could still see his smug, cruel smile as the iron heated in the coals. The memory made her want to shrink back, to pull her wrist from Kaelen's grasp and flee. But his hold, though not painful, was unbreakable. Find him. The command was absolute, leaving no room for question. Bring him to me, now. Lucas gave a sharp nod and dispatched 2 warriors with a jerk of his head. They moved with swift, efficient purpose, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. The wait was agonizing. No one spoke. No one dared to even meet their alphas. Eyes. Elara remained on her knees, her wrist still cradled in Kaelen's hand, a bizarre and public tableau of power and submission. She was the focal point of every single person in that hall, and the attention was a suffocating weight. It did not take long for the warriors to return. Flanking Beta Gorvin, the man strode in with his customary swagger, a confident expression on his face that quickly began to falter as he took in the scene. His eyes darted from the Alpha's thunderous expression to Elara, still kneeling on the floor, and finally to where Kaelen's hand held her branded wrist. A flicker of uncertainty passed over his features. You called for me, Alpha? Gorvin's voice was oily, trying to sound obsequious but missing the mark. Kaelen's voice was deceptively calm, a thin veneer over a raging torrent. You marked her. It was not a question, but Gorvin treated it as one, puffing out his chest slightly. Of course, Alpha. As per the ancient law, Every integrated wolf from a conquered pack is branded for clear identification. It is a necessary measure for security and order. He said it as if reciting from a manual, a hint of pride in his voice for upholding tradition. Kaelen slowly rose to his full height, finally releasing Elara's wrist. The loss of contact felt strangely like abandonment, leaving her skin cold. Where his warmth had been, he loomed over Gorvin, his power radiating from him in almost visible waves. The beta took an involuntary step back. That law, Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, was the work of a bitter old wolf, who understood conquest, but not rule. It is obsolete. As of this moment, it is abolished. He took another step forward, and Gorvin visibly shrank. But your transgression is not simply following an outdated command. Your failure is far greater. He turned his head, his piercing gaze, finding Elara once more. It softened for a fraction of a second, a look of something akin to reverence. That made her heart stutter. Then he turned back to Gorvin, and his expression hardened into something lethal. You took a hot iron, Kaelen said, each word a hammer strike, and you laid it on the skin of my fated mate. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a void into which all sound, all breath, all thought seemed to vanish. Elara felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Fated mate, the term echoed in her mind, meaningless and yet world-shattering. It was a concept from old tales, a myth of destined love she had long since stopped believing in. It could not be real. It could not be her. Gorvin's face went from confused to ashen white. His jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice, a panicked, reedy thing. Alpha, no, that's impossible. She's from Fallen Oak. She's a slave. There must be some mistake. The only mistake, Kaelen snarled, the control in his voice finally snapping, was my tolerance of your presence in my pack. You are stripped of your rank. You are exiled from Silvermane territory. If you are found within our borders by sunrise, you will be executed on sight. The sentence was delivered with such finality that it left no room for appeal. Gorvin looked as if he had been gutted. Two warriors moved forward, grabbing him by the arms as he began to sputter protests, and dragged him from the hall, his cries fading into the distance. Kaelen did not watch him go. His entire focus returned to Elara. The fury was gone from his face, replaced by that same intense, searching look. He moved toward her and extended his hand, palm open. It was not the command of an alpha to a slave. It was an offer, a question. Trembling, her mind reeling from the seismic shifts of the last few minutes, Elara looked at his hand. She saw the strength in it, the same hand that had just effortlessly dismantled a man's life. But she also saw the same hand that had held her wrist with such startling gentleness. Hesitantly, she placed her clean hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and he drew her to her feet. Her legs felt weak, unsteady. He did not let go. Instead, he raised her branded wrist once more. He bowed his head, and his lips pressed against the ugly, raised scar. The touch was not a kiss of passion, but one of absolution. A profound silence settled over the hall, bearing witness. When he lifted his head, his eyes held a possessive, burning light. This mark does not mean slave, he said, his voice low and resonant, meant for her alone. Not anymore. From this day forward, it will only ever mean mine. The silence in the great hall was a living entity, thick and disbelieving, pressing in on Elara from all sides. The words fated mate continued to echo in her mind, a dizzying mantra that made the solid stone floor feel as insubstantial as mist. Alpha Kaelen's hand remained around hers, an anchor in the surreal tempest he had unleashed. His declaration hung in the air, not as a romantic promise, but as a fundamental rewriting of her reality. The brand on her wrist, a 2-year-old testament to her subjugation, now felt alien under the lingering warmth of his lips. He did not release her hand. His gaze swept over his stunned pack, his expression shifting from the terrifying fury he had shown Gorvin to one of unwavering command. The show is over, he announced, his voice cutting through the silence with the sharpness of a blade. Return to your duties. It was a clear dismissal, and the crowd, as if released from a collective trance, began to disperse. The whispers started immediately, a hushed, frantic buzzing that followed them out of the hall, carrying the impossible news into the very bones of the stronghold. Kaelen turned his attention back to her, his icy eyes softening minutely. Come with me, he said, his tone leaving little room for refusal. Yet it was not harsh. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed, but now layered with a new unfamiliar note of consideration. He led her from the grand hall, his grip on her hand firm yet not unkind. She was acutely aware of the stares that followed their progress, the shocked glances from warriors and servants alike. She, the ghost, the slave who scrubbed floors, was now walking hand in hand with the Alpha himself. The world had tilted on its axis, and she struggled to find her footing. They did not go to the servants' quarters. Instead, he guided her up a wide, curved staircase she had only ever cleaned under strict supervision, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of powerful feet. They moved through corridors lined with tapestries depicting Silvermane's history, past closed doors that spoke of privacy and privilege she had never known. The air here was different. It smelled of beeswax and aged wood, of power and solitude. He stopped before a heavy oak door and pushed it open, leading her inside. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The room was vast, a suite fit for royalty. A large canopy bed dominated one wall, its curtains made of rich, dark velvet. A fireplace stood ready to be lit on another, with 2 plush armchairs positioned before it. A window larger than any she had seen offered a breathtaking view of the mountains that cradled the Silvermane territory. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "This will be your chambers," Kaelen stated, finally releasing her hand. He watched her, studying her reaction. Elara stood frozen just inside the doorway, her work-roughened hands clasped tightly together. She felt like a wild animal suddenly brought indoors, surrounded by finery she did not understand and did not trust. "My Alpha," she began, her voice a hesitant whisper. This is not appropriate. I have a pallet in the servants' wing. This is for Aluna." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Precisely, the word landed with the weight of a boulder. He moved further into the room, giving her space, yet his presence seemed to fill every corner. "You will have anything you need. Clothing, food, whatever you desire. You need only ask." Desire? The concept was so foreign it was laughable. For 2 years, her only desires had been for a moment of rest, a kind word, a scrap of bread that wasn't stale. This opulence felt like a different kind of brand, a gilded cage meant to dazzle and confuse her. As if reading the turmoil on her face, his expression grew more serious. "I understand this is a shock. The circumstances of our meeting are less than ideal." The understatement was so vast it bordered on absurdity. "The actions of my father's reign were often brutal. I am not my father. The mark on your wrist was his law. My first act in rectifying that is ensuring you are never treated with such disrespect again." He took a step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to retreat. "The bond between us, Elara," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips, spoken with such deliberate care, sent another shiver through her. "It is not something either of us chose, but it is real. I felt it the moment I touched you. You felt it too." She could not deny it. The electric jolt, the dizzying connection, it had been as undeniable as it was terrifying. She nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the woven rug beneath her feet. "Good," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "We will explore this in time. For now, rest. Acclimate yourself. This is your home now?" He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, a lone, overwhelmed figure in the center of the lavish room. "No one will harm you here. No one will disrespect you. You are under my protection. You are mine." With those final, possessive words, he left, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the profound silence. Elara was alone. She stood there for a long time, simply breathing, trying to process the cataclysm that had appended her life. She looked down at her wrist, at the scar that had defined her for so long. It looked the same, yet everything was different. He had called it a claim. He had called her his mate. But as her eyes scanned the luxurious prison around her, a chilling thought took root. A gilded cage was still a cage, and the desire of an alpha was a storm she did not know how to survive. The heavy oak door closed with a soft, final click, sealing Elara into a silence so profound it felt like a physical substance. She remained standing in the exact center of the room, her body thrumming with a nervous energy that had nowhere to Go. The grandeur of the suite pressed in on her, its opulence a stark, mocking contrast to the coarse fabric of her servant's dress and the grime still clinging to her hands from the floor she had been scrubbing what felt like a lifetime ago. Her gaze drifted from the high-beamed ceiling to the vast canopy bed, its linens looking impossibly soft and clean. She took a tentative step toward the fireplace, running her fingers over the back of one plush armchair. The fabric was finer than anything she had ever touched. This was not a room. It was a statement, a declaration of power and possession. Alpha Kaelen had not simply given her shelter. He had transplanted her into a world designed to showcase his authority and his wealth. The message was clear yet confusing. She was elevated, but the means of her elevation made her a stranger to herself. A hesitant knock on the door broke her reverie. She flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. Before she could respond, the door opened to reveal a young woman, perhaps her own age, holding a stack of folded fabrics. She had a kind, nervous face and kept her eyes carefully averted. "Pardon the intrusion, my lady," the girl said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Alpha sent me. I am to be your attendant. My name is Liana." The title my lady struck Elara as profoundly wrong. "Elara," she corrected softly. "Just Elara." A flicker of surprise crossed Liana's face, but she nodded. "As you wish. I have brought you some things. A change of clothes, soap, towels." She placed the stack on the end of the bed and gestured toward a door Elara hadn't noticed. "Through there is a bathing chamber. The water is still warm." The promise of a real bath, with hot water and soap that wasn't harsh lie, was a siren's call. Numbly, Elara nodded her thanks and moved toward the indicated door. The bathing chamber was another marvel, with a deep copper tub already filled with steaming water. She sank into it with a gasp, the heat seeping into her aching muscles, washing away not just the physical dirt of the day but beginning the slow, painful process of scrubbing away to years of ingrained servitude. The water clouded with grime, and when she emerged, wrapping herself in a towel softer than a cloud, she felt strangely raw and new. The clothes Liana had brought were simple, a sturdy woolen dress in a deep forest green, but the quality of the material was far superior to her old rags. It was a servant's dress, yet not. It fit her perfectly. When she returned to the main room, she found a tray of food waiting on a small table by the fireplace. A thick stew, fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, and a goblet of wine. Her stomach clenched with a hunger that was about more than food. It was the hunger for normalcy, for a kindness that did not feel like a transaction. She ate slowly, every bite a small rebellion against the years of scraps and leftovers. As she ate, she became aware of the world outside her door. The stronghold was humming. The news was out. She could hear it in the hushed tones of servants passing in the corridor, in the occasional too loud exclamation that was quickly stifled. She was the main subject of every conversation, the slave girl plucked from obscurity and anointed by the Alpha's inexplicable desire. She could only imagine what they were saying, that she had bewitched him, that it was a political maneuver, that it was a cruel joke. Her fears were confirmed when, later that afternoon, a different kind of visitor arrived. The door opened without a knock, and a tall, strikingly beautiful woman swept into the room. She was dressed in finely tailored hunting leathers, her blonde hair braided intricately around her head like a crown. Her eyes, a sharp, calculating gray, scanned the room before landing on Elara with undisguised contempt. This was Celine, daughter of a high-ranking elder, a woman whose ambition to become Luna was well known throughout the pack. "Well," Celine said, her voice a silken drawl that did nothing to hide the venom beneath. "So this is the little ghost who haunts our halls. I heard the most fascinating rumor. I simply had to see for myself." Elara stood up, instinctively squaring her shoulders, a gesture of defense she had learned among the servants. She said nothing. Celine circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey, a branded slave from a fallen pack, and now installed in the Luna's suite. "It is quite the fairy tale, isn't it?" She stopped in front of Elara, her gaze dropping to Elara's wrist. A cruel smile played on her lips. "Tell me, does it still hurt, the brand? Or has our Alpha's attention soothed the pain?" The implication was clear and ugly. Elara felt a hot flush of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "My past is my own, is it?" Celine laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "Nothing here is your own, little slave. Not your clothes, not this room, certainly not the Alpha's fleeting interest. He is a powerful man, Powerful men are often intrigued by novelties, but novelties tarnish, and they are quickly discarded. She leaned in closer, her scent of expensive perfume and cold ambition washing over Elara. Remember your place. It is still on the floor. This, she gestured dismissively at the room. This is just a prettier cage. When he grows bored of you, the door will lock, and no one will hear you scream. With that final, chilling prediction, Celine turned and swept from the room, leaving behind a cloud of hostility and doubt. Her words found their mark, echoing Elara's own fears. This was a gilded cage. The Alpha's desire was a capricious thing, a storm that had lifted her up, but could just as easily dash her back down. When Kaelen visited that evening, his presence filled the room just as completely as it had the great hall. He had changed into simpler, though still impeccably made, dark trousers and a tunic. He looked at her in her new dress, a approving glint in his eye. "Does it suit you? Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Elara clasped her hands behind her back, hiding the brand he had already claimed. "The room is very grand, Alpha." "Thank you." He frowned slightly, sensing the distance in her tone. "You are safe here, Elara." "Am I?" The question slipped out, fueled by Celine's venom and her own trepidation. "Safe from everyone but you?" His expression darkened, not with anger, but with a sudden, intense understanding. He took a step toward her, and she held her ground, though her heart was hammering. "You think my desire is a threat?" "I think it is a force I do not understand," she replied honestly, her voice trembling. "It has taken me from a life I knew, however hard, and placed me here, in a world where everyone hates me for it. You have made me a target. Your protection feels like isolation." He was silent for a long moment, his icy blue eyes studying her face, seeing the fear and the strength warring within her. For the first time, he looked not like a conqueror who had claimed a prize, but like a man confronted with an unexpected consequence. "The desire is real, Elara," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its Alpha's command. "It is not a weapon, it is a compass, and it has led me to you. The rest, the politics, the jealousy, that is the world we must navigate, but we will navigate it together." He did not try to touch her. He simply stood there, offering words instead of commands, acknowledgement instead of assumption. It was the first thing he had done that felt like it was for her, and not merely about his claim on her. And in that moment, the gilded walls of the cage seemed to stretch ever so slightly, offering a glimpse of something that was not just possession, but the possibility of a partnership. The storm of his desire was still terrifying, but perhaps it was not one she had to weather alone. The days that followed settled into a strange and fragile rhythm. Elara remained in her luxurious suite, a world away from the clamor of the kitchens and the endless scrubbing of floors, yet she was more confined than ever. Her world had shrunk to the dimensions of a few opulent rooms, each object within them a reminder of her dislocated status. Liana, her quiet and efficient attendant, became her sole, hesitant connection to the life of the stronghold, bringing meals, news, and the unspoken weight of the pack's staring eyes. Alpha Kaelen was a constant, unpredictable presence. He did not demand her company, nor did he force his attentions upon her. Instead, he would arrive in the evenings, a formidable silhouette in her doorway, and simply be there. Sometimes he brought books, volumes of history and law from his personal library, placing them on a table, with a quiet suggestion that she might find them interesting. Other times, he would simply stand by the large window, his gaze fixed on the mountains, sharing a silence that was less comfortable than it was charged with unspoken questions. The tension between them was a living thing. It was woven from the undeniable, electric pull of the bond he called fate and the deep, scarred-over wounds of their shared, violent history. He was the conqueror, she was the conquered. That simple, brutal truth lay between them like a chasm, and neither seemed to know how to build a bridge across it. One evening, he arrived looking more weary than she had ever seen him. The mantle of leadership seemed to rest more heavily on his broad shoulders. He did not bring a book. He went directly to the fireplace and stood before the unlit logs, his back to her. "The council spent the day arguing over grain tariffs," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to stir the quiet air in the room. "For 6 hours, grown men and women debated the price of wheat as if the fate of the world depended on it." He let out a short, humorless breath. "My father would have ended the discussion with a shout. Sometimes I envy the simplicity of that The tyranny of it. Elara, who had been sitting in one of the armchairs, her hands folded in her lap, watched him. This was new. This was not the Alpha making a declaration. This was a man voicing a private frustration. He ruled by fear, she said softly, the words leaving her lips before she could consider the danger in them. Kaelen turned to look at her, his glacial blue eyes sharp with interest. Yes, he did. And fear is a simple tool. It requires no nuance. It leaves no room for debate. He took a few steps toward her, stopping to lean against the mantelpiece. But it does not build anything that lasts. It only ensures obedience until a stronger fear comes along. He was silent for a moment, his gaze intense. The branding iron, the public executions, the constant raids on smaller packs, like yours. He said the words deliberately, watching her flinch. These were the tools of his fear. I watched him use them my entire life. I argued against them. I was disregarded. Elara felt the air leave her lungs. This was a confession, an admission of a powerlessness she had never attributed to him. She had painted him in her mind with the same brush as his father, a monolithic figure of ruthless ambition. Now he was showing her the cracks in that image. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because you look at me and you see him, he stated, his voice raw with an honesty that disarmed her completely. You see the man who gave the order that led to your brand. I need you to see me. I need you to know that the attack on Fallen Oak was my father's last campaign. A final bloody act of a dying wolf trying to prove his strength. I was away, trying to secure a peace with the northern clans. When I returned, it was done. The words landed heavily in the space between them. They did not erase the past. The pain was still there, the memory of loss still acute. But they changed its shape, its context. He had not been the gleeful conqueror. He had been a son, returning. To find atrocity committed in his family's name, a window had been opened. Seizing a courage she did not know she possessed, Elara spoke into the new space. We were not a threat, she said, her voice gaining strength. We were farmers, healers. My mother, she could mend a broken wing on a sparrow. My father taught me the names of every star in the winter sky. We did not have an army. We had a community. The memories, long suppressed by pain, surfaced now, bringing with them a sharp ache of homesickness. You speak of your father's tools. My family, my home, my past. We were just another one of his tools, used and discarded. Kaelen listened, his expression grave. He did not offer excuses. He did not interrupt. He simply let her speak, let her pour the truth of her loss into the silence he had created with his own. When she finished, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, he moved. He did not go to her. He simply sank into the armchair opposite hers, the distance between them feeling smaller than it ever had. I cannot give you back what was taken, he said, his voice low and fervent. I would if I could. All I can do is try to be a different kind of alpha, one who builds rather than breaks, one who protects what is precious. His eyes held hers. Starting with you. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more solid, more foundational. It was a recognition. He saw her not as a prize won in battle, but as a person who had suffered a great wrong, a wrong he now felt responsible for righting. The chasm between them was still there, vast and deep, but for the first time, they were standing on the same side of it, looking across together. The flickering firelight caught the silver in his eyes, and in that moment, Elara did not see the Alpha or the Conqueror. She saw a man burdened by his legacy, trying to forge a new path. And she understood, with a startling clarity, that her presence in his life was not just about fate's desire. It was about his redemption. The ghost and the king bound together not just by a primal pull, but by a shared history of pain and a tentative, terrifying hope for a different future. The walls of her gilded cage, for the first time, felt less like a prison and more like the foundations of something yet to be built. The fragile understanding blossoming between Elara and Kaelen did not go unnoticed. Their world was not confined to the quiet sanctuary of her chambers. It existed in the great hall, in the training yards, in the whispered conversations of a pack watching its alpha's every move with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The abolition of the branding law had been a seismic shift. His claim on a conquered slave was a revolution, and revolutions inevitably breed dissent. The ringleader was a warrior named Theron. He was a hulking man, all hardened muscle and simmering resentment, whose prestige had been built on the old ways of conquest and unquestioning obedience to the strong. He had been a favorite of Kaelen's father, and he wore the former Alpha's brutal philosophy like a second skin. To him, Kaelen's new path was not progress, it was weakness. And Elara was the living, breathing symbol of that perceived frailty. The challenge began not with a shout, but with a look. A cold, dismissive glare aimed at Elara as she walked with Liana through a lower courtyard, trying to gather the courage to step beyond the main keep. It was a look that stripped her of the fine clothes and the title of mate, reducing her once more to the branded slave. The following day, a group of Theron's loyalists deliberately turned their backs when Kaelen brought her to observe the training grounds, a profound and calculated insult. The tension coiled tighter each day, a spring being compressed. It finally snapped on a morning when the air was crisp and the sun shone brightly on the packed earth of the central compound. Kaelen had called a gathering to address the distribution of winter provisions, a new system based on need rather than rank. Theron stood at the front of the assembled crowd, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of open defiance. When Kaelen finished speaking, a respectful silence should have followed. Instead, Theron's voice cut through the air, loud and challenging. "This is a farce." All eyes turned to him. Kaelen's posture remained relaxed, but his eyes turned to chips of ice. "You have an objection to feeding our young and our elderly, Theron?" "I have an objection to this softness," Theron spat, taking a step forward. He jabbed a thick finger in Elara's direction. She stood slightly behind Kaelen, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This is where it starts. With her, you set a mongrel from a broken pack at your side and expect us to kneel? You tear down the laws that made us strong and replace them with pretty words and pity. You are leading Silvermane to ruin." A low murmur of agreement rippled through a segment of the crowd. Kaelen's power flared, a palpable wave of dominance that made the murmurs die instantly. "Careful, Theron," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You are questioning your Alpha's judgment." "I am," Theron roared, throwing his arms wide. "I am questioning the judgment of a man who is led by his lust instead of his duty. That woman is a chain around your neck, and you are dragging us all down with you." The insult hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. There was no taking it back. Under the ancient laws of pack and challenge, there was only one answer. Kaelen did not look at Elara. His entire being was focused on Theron, his energy condensing into a lethal calm. "You have made a formal challenge to my authority and my mate. Do you stand by it?" "I do," Theron snarled, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He had wanted this. He had forced it. "I challenge you, Kaelen, for the right to lead Silvermane. To purge this weakness and restore our strength." The compound fell into a deathly silence. This was not a simple sparring match. This was a duel for dominance. "To the death, so be it," Kaelen said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the compound. "We will settle this under the moon tonight. The pack will bear witness." The hours that followed were an agony of suspended time for Elara. The stronghold was a held breath. She waited in her room, her mind racing. This was her fault. Her presence had fractured his pack. Her past had come to threaten his future. The gilded cage was now a trap, and she was the bait that had lured him into a fight for his life. When the moon rose, full and cold, its silver light bathed the same compound where the challenge had been issued. The entire pack formed a wide circle, their faces tense and solemn. Theron stood shirtless in the center, his body a map of old scars, muscles coiled and ready. Kaelen arrived, moving with a predator's quiet grace. His own torso was bare, revealing the powerful physique of a born warrior. His eyes found Elara's in the crowd, and for a fleeting second, the ice in them melted, replaced by a look of fierce, unwavering certainty. It was a look that said "for you." Then the Alpha was gone, and the warrior remained. There were no rules, no weapons, only tooth, claw, and will. Theron attacked first, a bull charge meant to overwhelm. Kaelen moved with breathtaking speed, sidestepping the lunge and delivering a crushing blow to Theron's side. The fight was brutal, a savage dance of power and fury. Theron was raw strength and rage, but Kaelen was something more. He was precision, he was strategy, he was the storm itself. Elara watched, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails bit into her palms. She saw Theron's claws rake across Kaelen's shoulder, drawing blood. She saw Kaelen's fist connect with Theron's jaw with a crack that echoed in the night. This was not a fight for a title. It was a fight for the soul of the pack, for the future Kaelen wanted to build. For her, with a final, mighty roar, Kaelen seized an opening. He dodged a killing blow, grabbed Theron by the throat and shoulder, and using the man's own momentum, slammed him onto the hard ground with earth-shattering force. He stood over him, his chest heaving, blood trickling from his wounds, his eyes blazing with primal victory. "Yield," Kaelen commanded, his voice the guttural growl of the wolf within. Theron, broken and beaten, could only gasp his submission. Kaelen did not kill him. He stood, releasing his defeated challenger, and turned to face his pack. His gaze swept over them, and in that moment, he was more alpha than he had ever been. He had proven his strength not through ruthless execution, but through controlled power and mercy. His eyes found Elara again. The message was clear for all to see. His desire for her was not a weakness. It was inextricably linked to his strength. He had fought for her, and in doing so, he had fought for the new world he promised. He had won, and in the silent, awestruck gaze of his pack, she was no longer just his desired mate. She was the reason for his victory. She was his Luna. The victory under the moon did not end with the fight. It began there. In the days that followed, a subtle but profound change settled over the Silvermane stronghold. The open hostility that had simmered beneath the surface evaporated, replaced by a wary respect and a dawning curiosity. The pack had seen their alpha fight with a ferocity that eclipsed even his father's legendary brutality, but he had chosen mercy over a killing blow. He had proven his strength was not diminished by his compassion. It was defined by it, and at the center of that new definition stood Elara. She was no longer a ghost. She was a presence. When she walked through the courtyards now, heads did not turn away in dismissal. They nodded in acknowledgement. The warriors who had once turned their backs now offered her a respectful incline of their heads. The fear in the servant's eyes was gradually replaced by something that looked like hope. She was living proof that the old order of cruelty and subjugation was truly over. Kaelen, sensing the shift, began to include her in the life of the pack, not as a trophy, but as a partner. He asked for her opinion on matters of the household, on the allocation of resources, valuing the perspective of someone who had known lack. He brought her to sit beside him during open audiences, not on a separate throne, but in a chair placed close to his. It was a silent, powerful statement of equality. She listened to the disputes and concerns of his people, and sometimes she would lean over and whisper a thought in his ear. He would listen, his head tilted toward hers, and often he would incorporate her insight into his judgment. The connection between them, once a terrifying and foreign force, began to weave itself into the fabric of their daily lives. It was in the brush of his hand against hers when they walked, in the way his gaze would find her across a crowded room, a silent communication that needed no words, in the deep, abiding sense of rightness that settled in her soul when he was near. The electric jolt of their first touch had softened into a constant, warm current, a hum of belonging that was her new reality. One evening, he came to her chambers and did not speak of pack business. He simply held out his hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentle. He led her out of the stronghold, away from the noise and the lights, up a narrow path that wound its way into the mountains behind the keep. The air was cold and clean, filled with the scent of pine and night-blooming flowers. The full moon, the same witness to his victory, hung overhead, bathing the world in a silvery, magical light. They reached a high ledge that overlooked the entire Silvermane Valley. The stronghold below looked small and peaceful, its windows glowing like scattered embers. The world was vast and silent around them. "It began in violence and pain," Kaelen said, his voice quiet against the immense backdrop of the night. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "A story that should never have been written that way." He turned to face her, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "But it is our story, and I want to give it a new beginning, one we choose, one that honors what we are to each other." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a simple, elegant circlet woven from moon-blessed silver and strands of night dark wood. It was not a crown of conquest, but a symbol of unity. "Elara of the fallen oak," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart ache with its beauty. "My fated mate, my strength, my equal. Will you stand beside me? Not as a prize I won, but as the Luna I choose. Will you bind your life to mine under the moon and the stars, before the pack and the gods?" Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it felt like healing. She looked at the man before her, the Alpha, the conqueror, the protector, the man who had fought for her, learned with her, and loved her with a patience and ferocity that had dismantled every wall around her heart. The scar on her wrist, once a mark of shame, felt like a badge of honor, a testament to a journey from darkness into light. Yes, she whispered, the word carrying on the night wind. I choose you. I choose us. He placed the circlet upon her brow. It was cool against her skin, a perfect, comforting weight. Then he drew her into his arms, and his lips found hers. This kiss was nothing like the first, which had been a claim. This was a vow. It was a promise of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. It was a seal upon their new beginning. Weeks later, the mating ceremony was not a show of power. It was a celebration of unity. The entire pack gathered under the stars, their faces illuminated by torchlight. They watched as Elara, dressed in a gown of deep green that echoed the forests of her lost home, walked toward Kaelen. They listened as they spoke their vows, promises of loyalty, respect, and a love that had been forged in the most unlikely of fires. At the end of the ceremony, Kaelen took her hand and raised her branded wrist to his lips once more. He kissed the scar, a gesture that had become their own sacred ritual. This mark, he said, his voice ringing out clear and strong for all to hear, never meant slave. It was a promise waiting to be kept. It was always a reminder that my other half was out there, waiting for me to find her. And now, it is a symbol of a love that overcame hatred, a desire that defied status, a faith that healed the deepest of wounds. He turned her hand over and pressed a kiss to her palm before placing it over his own heart. It means you are mine, and I am yours, forever. As the pack's joyous howls rose into the night sky, a chorus of blessing for their Alpha and their new Luna, Elara knew the journey was over. The ghost had been laid to rest. The slave had been freed. The woman remained, loved, respected, whole. She looked at her mate, her Alpha, her future, and she saw not an end, but a beautiful beginning. The end.